get this, the left might actually have a real shot at winning this next election. I know, right?
Yeah.
Against the odds. But here's the thing. This isn't just some pundit with a crystal ball, you know?
Yeah.
They're going deeper, like way deeper.
It's about looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah, exactly. It's about those underlying currents that really shape the political landscape.
The stuff that doesn't always make the headlines.
Exactly. We're going beyond those fleeting polls, those little snapshots in time. We're talking about the forces that drive real change.
The movements, the ideas.
Yeah. And that's where this idea of grassroots momentum comes in. The podcast kept mentioning it. You know, they were talking about all those labor strikes we've been seeing, the climate protests, the surge in youth activism, all those things that seem kind of separate when you just glance at the news, right?
Right.
But what if they're not? What if it's all connected?
Well, think about it. When you see grassroots momentum like that, it usually means something's brewing beneath the surface.
Right. Like, what are they all responding to?
Could be a sign of a deeper dissatisfaction, you know?
Yeah.
People are getting more and more engaged. They're willing to challenge those in power and demand change.
And they're not just grumbling about it at the dinner table.
Yeah.
They're taking to the streets.
Exactly. It's like a wave, you
Right.
know, building up, gaining momentum, and that energy, well, has to go somewhere.
Right. Right. And speaking of energy, we can't ignore the young voters here. I mean, the podcast was really emphasizing how Gen Z and millennials are turning out in record numbers.
Yeah, and that's pretty significant.
Right. It's not just a blip. It's a historical anomaly.
And it's probably no coincidence that these are the generations most directly impacted by things like climate change and student loan debt, right?
Yeah. Those are the issues that hit them right where they live.
Exactly. I mean, think back to the civil rights movement, for example. It was young people who really drove that change.
That's true. It takes that kind of energy to shake things up, right?
It does. And it's interesting because when younger generations get involved, it often benefits the left.
Yeah.
Their platforms tend to be more aligned with those concerns we were talking about.
Okay, so we've got this groundswell of grassroots energy. We've got young voters fired up and turning out. But then the podcast throws in this other curveball. They start talking about unexpected coalitions,
Oh, yeah.
like unions joining forces with progressive candidates.
Yeah.
Or different activist groups who we wouldn't think would have anything in common, suddenly finding common ground.
Interesting. Yeah.
And they're blurring those traditional political lines.
Because it's not about party loyalty anymore.
Right, it's not.
It's about shared interests, like environmental groups and labor unions, for instance. They might not always see eye to eye,
Yeah.
but, you know, when they both advocate for green jobs and sustainable economic practices, well, that's a powerful combination.
They become a force to be reckoned with.
Right. And they can really change the conversation.
It makes you wonder if maybe all this this coalition building is coming out of something the podcast called Polarization Fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
It's like people are just exhausted by the gridlock, the constant bickering and the lack of action.
Yeah, it can be pretty disheartening.
Right. And so they're looking for something different, something beyond those old divisions.
And absolutely. And when the system feels broken, people start to look for new ways to fix it.
Right. And the left, well, they're often the ones proposing those more radical or at least different solutions.
Yeah, there's big structural changes.
Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about something the source called crisis politics.
Yeah.
They were arguing that economic hardship, those moments of real crisis, actually push voters toward change.
Makes sense. Right.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, when times are good, people might not be so eager to rock the boat, but when things get tough,
Exactly. They start demanding more than just minor tweaks.
right, they want real solutions. They want fundamental change.
Think about it like a ship in a storm. When the seas are calm, the passengers are happy to stay the course. But when the storm hits, they demand a new direction.
Wow, yeah.
And historically, those moments of crisis, those big economic downturns or social upheavals, they often lead to these demands for systemic reform.
And that's where the left comes in, right?
Exactly. Because their focus is on those big picture solutions, the government intervention, the social welfare programs, the things that people need when times are tough.
It's like they're offering a lifeline in the storm.
Yeah. They're stepping up with a plan when a lot of other folks are just, you know, holding on for dear life.
Yeah. Now, speaking of reaching out, one thing that really caught my attention was how the podcast emphasized the left's voter outreach strategies.
Oh.
They're not just throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks.
No, they're being much more strategic.
They're using social media, but it's targeted. They're collaborating with influencers who can speak to those communities that often get ignored. They're doing a lot of grassroots organizing, that old-fashioned door-to-door community event kind of stuff.
And that makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Mobilizing those voters who haven't traditionally been engaged.
Right. It's like tapping into a whole new wellspring of political power.
Exactly. Because when you engage those folks, you're not just getting their vote, you're getting their voices, their perspectives.
And that can change everything.
It really can.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Yeah. We've talked about grassroots momentum, about how younger generations are getting involved, about the power of those unexpected coalitions,
Yeah.
about polarization fatigue and how crisis can actually drive change. And of course, about those targeted outreach strategies that the left is using. It's a pretty compelling case for why they might just pull this off.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see how all these factors are coming together.
And remember, we're not making predictions here.
Right.
This isn't about picking sides. It's about understanding the bigger picture.
It's about seeing how these underlying currents can shape the outcome.
So as we go through this election season, let's keep our eyes on the deeper trends. Let's pay attention to the energy on the ground, those voices that are rising up. Let's look beyond the headlines and the polls.
The future is always uncertain.
It is, but understanding these dynamics, understanding how these forces work, well, it gives us a better chance of navigating that uncertainty.
And maybe even shaping it a little bit, right?
Maybe so. All right, folks.